done by a towering success. So thanks for that intro. I'm going to do what Adam did last time, sit down and see what else works. Anyway, so Clifford's Tower, you all been there. Hands up who hasn't been there. Cheeky, isn't it? Yes, well, plenty of time. Anyway, that's good. So you all know the building, that's a good start. I mean, obviously it's very famous. Castles people love the building. It's extremely well known in castle circles. And of course, it's the only really recognisable remnant in this great castle, about the size of the Tower of London, so not messing about. Clifford's Tower itself has been ruined since 1684, but in 2nd of April 2022, it was reopened with great fanfare by British Heritage and looked after 1984 at the end of a £5 million, roughly £5 million project to show it to the public, see more of it, and explain it better. And I say straight away that, in my view, my colleague, ex-colleague, Carl, is sitting over and wrote the article about this with me, we think it is a triumph for success, and there are a few qualifications. So great, it's a great project. And I can say that safe in the knowledge that it has absolutely nothing to do with me. So, and as I say, you can read all about it in an article in the Castle Studies Group Journal, which I'm sure is on all your shelves, and you can find that online should you want to. So, what I'm going to talk about is the three things really: the origins and the design and the history of Clifford's Tower, the project when it comes to the things they did to it physically, the works for the building, and then the explanation to the public, which in museum and heritage jargon is called interpretation. So the point of this is, like all history, starts with William the Conqueror. There he is on a silver penny. The point is, I suppose, is that the Norman conquest did not end with the Battle of Hastings at its beginning. It took many years to complete the conquest. And one of the biggest dangers William faced was a major revolt in the north in 1068. He suppressed the revolt very successfully, and he built a castle in York, which is the origin of the castle in which Clifford's Tower is part. And in the process, he swept away 1/6 of the city, demolished hundreds of houses in order to make room for his castle. The next year, there was another revolt, the famous revolt of 1069, followed by the harrying of the north, which was a pretty awful event. He built a second castle, and if you look at this slide, you'll see top right is Castle 1, bottom left is Castle 2. You can see it very clearly from Skeldergate Bridge, you'll wander over that. And what remains is Great Mound of Earth, which is a motte, second motte, Dale Hill. And if you look very carefully, you can see how the two castles fit into the modern street plan. So, this is the castle in about 1100, as imagined in a very well-informed way by the excellent artist Terry Ball. And you can see on the left, whacking great motte, most of that's still there, Bailey in front of you, and behind the minster in earlier incarnation that you can see today. And on the right, in fact, surrounding the castle, the King's Pool, which is an enormous lake, which not only provided fish, made a bit of recreation, but also powered the mills on the dam. But Clifford's Tower story starts really with Henry III, 1216, 1272, father obviously the first, great king, and a great builder king. He loved building, and he wrote what we would almost call the specifications. He said exactly what he wanted, expert in building techniques and the great aesthete. And he came to York on the way to Newcastle in August of 1244, even though the precise day the records are extremely good. And he discussed with the sheriff the possibility of reinforcing the castle, which, as you see from the last slide, was entirely in wood, and Henry wanted a stone castle. But you can't build a stone castle without wood, so he sent two people up to York from somewhere else. I wish we knew where, that would help a lot. But anyway, he sent Simon the carpenter and Henry the mason, that's Clementarius from and by 1251, the accounts show that Clifford's Tower was being built, so we know that fact. And there was a very cross order from a very angry Henry III in 1270 saying, for heaven's sake, finish it by Easter, or I'll, dot. And so we can assume that it's probably finished by 1270. So quite a long time to build it. Obviously, there were problems because it's on a motte. If you build a stone building on a motte, you tend to risk subsidence, which is, you've seen it happen. But when finished, bear with me for a minute. It seems to be randomly going the wrong way. No, there you are, sorry. That's the castle of about 1300. That's the same man who's the other one. I'll get the hang of it eventually. And probably look much like that. You see all the defences now, except for the rampart between the motte and the bailey, are stone, and bits of those still survive if you carefully. Now, the key character here, apart from the king, is this chap called Henry Mason, and he was probably a chap called Henry of Reims, and Reims means France in France, and he was a great architect. He was one of the architects in those days, but that's what he was, and he designed Westminster Abbey, East End and transept to Westminster Abbey. The rest was copied in exactly the same style a century later. So you've seen that in front of your screens during the coronation, so it's familiar to all of you. You can see, if you remember my crappy picture, he was a great. Now, the evidence that it was him is circumstantial, but I think the ingenuity of the design of Clifford's Tower is one of a number of factors that shows that it was him. So, what did he build? Well, he built what castle people would call a shell keep, and that's only recently been worked out. In other words, it wasn't a solid building with a roof over the top of it. It was a kind of ring of buildings around a central courtyard. And just when you've got the plans up there, note the funny shape of the tower. It's very distinctive. But that is a picture of Windsor Great Tower in the 1640s. And you can see there, although the tower itself is 12th century, you can see there's a big square hole in the middle, which is the court. So that's the shell. So Clifford's Tower was something like that. As it had a much more complicated plan, if I dared, I'd go back, but I don't. And you will remember from the slide, it's got 4 bulgy bits, 4 lobes, which is an exercise in geometrical virtuosity, which is completely unnecessary and led to problems in the future. But it is unique and it's extremely impressive. And historians spend a lot of time wondering where the idea of this amazing tower came from. And since actually Clark in the 1880s, the idea has been that it was based on this tower at Étampes, which is near Paris, and it shares the quadrilobe plan. Actually, it shares some dimensions, which is very interesting, which are nearly identical, which does point to some kind of direct copying. That's perfectly possible. That does happen in the pages. You can see there that at the top, you can see the bulky bits, the 4 lobes. It was a very different shape in terms of proportion. It's much taller, and this is a drawing from the wonderful Prix Reserve, the Duke of Berry, early 15th century. You can see it's very tall, with a conical roof on top, so it wasn't a shell keep, it was much taller, but it was similar in plan. There is no connection, either Henry III didn't go there, Henry of Reims didn't design it, unfortunately, so again, this is speculation whether that's the origin. Now, the alternative, which I actually believe is more likely, is based on this, not that particular image, but the shape around the edge, which art historians call a barbed quadrilobe, barbed with a pointy bit in the corners. And this is a motif which is very, very popular. Think, for example, of baptistry doors in Florence, famous and it's used all over the place. But apparently, according to the great Gothic architecture pundit, not before 1260. Now, to say something didn't happen before a certain date is extremely late. And he's Andrew Martindale in the 60s. He's clearly wrong. We certainly find this in 12th century architecture, certainly in the plan. And I suspect that Henry of Reims was having a bit of a joke. This is a conceit. He's taking something which is usually used in graphics and in bas-reliefs and reliefs and painting, and he's lying it flat on his back on the floor and turning to plan for a building. And I think that is, the last week or so, I thought that's more and more likely. And quite funny, it's kind of think Henry of Reims is a bit of a joker. Quite well done. So, the later history of Clifford's Tower. It's been called Clifford's Tower since the 1590s, but we don't know why. If you read even the current English Heritage Guide, it will tell you that the Cliffords were the hereditary castle, which is not true. And this is not the arms of the Clifford, which is over the front door. Last year I would have said, oh, this is the Clifford's arms, and it's called back because Henry III Earl of Cumberland was the constable, he put the arms up. We don't know that. So that's something which is in store for us to find out, but that's what you happen to know, of course. So Clifford's Tower since the 16th century, but we don't think before. So this is a drawing by the York antiquary author Francis Place, or draftsman obviously, of about 1618. You can see at the top of Clifford's Tower there are flags and muskets poking up and guns sticking out through the battlements. It was a military building, and it was, as you know, used during the Civil War. It was also a store for gunpowder, and that led to its demise in a sense, because in 1684 there was a fire in the building, and the fire ignited the powder magazine and blew the roof off, and did some other damage as well. So it turned into an empty shell, which until recently it has remained ever since. It was then rescued by a brilliant engineer called Mott, just before and during and just after the First World War, from collapse, and opened, as I said earlier, to the public in the 1920s. So it's spent most of its life since then as a consolidated shell, pretty stable, a bit wonky, but from the visitor point of view, pretty unsatisfactory on various counts. First of all, the conservation of the building itself not great. This is magnesium limestone, which is very vulnerable to acid rain, even mildly acid rain, and a building which is meant to be roofed. If it's left exposed to the elements, it decays very quickly. So that wasn't great. Public access wasn't great either. You have, as you still have, to walk up that great ramp up the Mott. But inside, you could go up and creep your way around the tops of battlements, a very narrow, vertiginous passage, and you could wander around the inside and peek up, craning on that, looking up features that originally lined the first floors. That wasn't great either. And most people were completely baffled by what they were looking at, and it wasn't anything like as appealing as it should be, and there was no disabled access. And EH, in the heritage, has to think of these things, could see that it had much more commercial potential, selling tickets to people, than it had at the time when it was a roofless ruin. So since the 80s at least, and I think probably since 1920, there have been proposals to deal with those issues and improve it, including re-roofing. And one of my first visits to York when I worked for British Heritage was with a bunch of engineers and archaeologists looking at see whether we could do exactly that, and that came to nothing. But in 2019, the proposal to do something was revived, and geniuses they were came up with this, which actually would have solved the practical problems very neatly. You see there's a sort of submarine pen dug into the side of the Mott at the bottom there. Looks like something from Saint-Nazaire. And that caused, as most of you will perhaps recall, a hoo-ha, an enormous proportion. Everyone was up after committees were formed, and people no doubt marched, and they certainly made a lot of fuss with the planning authorities. And eventually, it wasn't turned out banned. But in 2019, having ripped up all those plans, a new scheme was devised. And I was going to quote to you the brief for this, because that's where it all started. Sorry? Don't worry. The brief says, and I quote here, an inspiring, sensitively designed new structure in the historic monument, new structure, and the removal of unsatisfactory features of the present arrangement, which included a plastic shop, which we do not regret in the middle of the space. Anyway, the competition was won by a partnership called Martin Ashley Architects in collaboration with Hugh Broughton Architects, who did the job. Their approach, as they expressed it, was to take a light touch and to respect the ruin as a ruin, which sounds a bit sort of odd, but that's a very important point, and allowing the weather in. And that, as I say, is important. And what they were aiming to do was display the building as what I've called avoided ruins. You have a building which is empty inside, and you want to retain the kind of aspect of it as a ruin, whilst doing things to make it accessible and watertight. So this was an idea pioneered, I think, probably at this place, which is Loche, not far from the Loire River in France, built by the Count of Anjou very early in that century. But you can see that the metal galleries are definitely 21st century, so they are. And what they do is they allow you to wander around at all of the 5 levels of the gigantic tower and look at the fireplaces and the windows and the seats and the graffiti and the other interesting bits and pieces at eye level, even though you're 70 feet in. And that's really great success, I must say. So that was an inspiration for what happened at Clifford Tower. And English Heritage also did a similar thing at Kenilworth Castle. This is Leicester's building, a great big tall thing opposite the keep at Kenilworth, built in the 1570s by Robert Dudley. Another great success, really. You can see the building there at eye level, top. And I suspect probably in a few years something similar will happen at Rochester. And I hope it will, because it's really crying out for it. That's a debate which has been going on at least the last 30 years. So, what did Broughton actually come up with? They
middle muscle.
I haven't touched that yet.
That's the one on the top takes you backwards.
Oh, hang on. This is rather annoying.
So I've seen them all again.
And you've seen them all again. Look, Joy.
Double lecture.
It's random. It picks them random.
Just stop. Getting close.
You're getting close. You're getting close.
That one.
Next one.
Next one.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for your patience. This is Broughton's sketch, which is a CGI thing. Clifford Tower has a history of subsidence that we built on a knot. It's inherently unstable. So one of the things that couldn't happen, which happened at Larsham Kenilworth, is that the structure you put inside the building was carried by the original. So that couldn't happen here. So what they devised was this item, which is the stuff you put inside the shell of the building. You can see it's a very ingenious solution, because it's structurally entirely independent of the masonry. There's no load on the medieval, and it's completely reversible. You can take all that out, and no one knows who's ever been there. That's an important principle in dealing with historic buildings. At the base, there's an enormous concrete raft. As we said, that would be quite difficult to remove and would be possible. And then there are 4 10-metre tall glue laminate wood piers, and everything inside the medieval shell is suspended from those piers. Very clever. Materials are laminated wood, steel mesh with a dash of concrete. So it's entirely functional. There's no decorative component to what actually designed. And they haven't attempted to disguise any of the engineering, which is sometimes called honesty, because it does make sense. So there it is. It's completely distinguishable from any fabric that is going to get used. Right, how I'm going to make this work. That's a crane. I show you that because this was a major feat of engineering, apart from anything else, because the tower is on top of a lot, which is 60 foot high or so, and so everything had to be craned in, and the whole thing was sheeted with scaffolding. See there's a kind of ramp entrance there from a lift, and I think that £5 million went a long way actually. Just the cost of that scaffolding, that training is impressive. So to the interior, here you have what I've called the voided interior. You can see the sky. Chuck waving his arms at the top there, and yep, you can experience the weather. The rain pours through that hole from time to time. And it works very well. You can see us, you feel as though you're in a building which is not sort of closed at the top, and from the top, you look down, and there's a view from the roof. And inside, very importantly, those galleries which you can see there give access to parts of the building which weren't previously accessible. For example, dead ahead there on that ramp, the first floor doorway to a spiral stair which goes down to the ground floor. It wasn't accessible before because it led to nowhere. And on the left-hand side, a gallery leading to the built-in guardroom latrine. Incidentally, you should be able to see Carnarvon Arch or two there, which is the same club. For a long time. And of course, you can also get in and see the latrine itself, which is very exciting. And how that worked? Well, it's a big hole. The slot in front of you is where the seat sat, and then on the left-hand side, interestingly, not unique, is the seating for a lead pipe, which would have flushed the pipe, as it were, from a tank on the roof. So anyway, people can go and look at that and marvel at its ingenuity. And you can also see the chapel properly, which you couldn't before, which is an exquisite small space with an arcade you can see there, which originally had the columns against the wall. A very private chapel, probably for use of King and the Queen and their intimates, but no one else. The only inconvenience was the portcullis over the doorway below was drawn up through the chapel, which is quite common in medieval castles. And there is a window, which you can see at eye level, first floor window. Incidentally, a complicated or an ingenious form of window, which is a crossbow slit at the lower level window, probably glazed at the upper level, so it's a hybrid. So much for the way the building has been displayed to the public. A bit about the interpretation. So they too had a brief, the people who managed the interpretation, and what they expressed it as, what they wanted to do was transport people and wake up their imagination. And I sort of pick these quotes randomly, there are lots of them. And offer stories in the tower that both reflect the national significance of the castle and the role it played in English history, but also stories at a much more personal level. So the story is very much about people and stories. You're not going to be offered a lesson of architectural history or dynastic history or history. It's going to be about people and events which happened there. The interpretation, incidentally, is available off-site. There's a virtual tour, which we looked at recently, and that takes you through the building, points out bits and pieces of interest. It quotes the text from the graphic panels. I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity. I think in some ways it could have shown you a lot more, and perhaps that's the intention, prove it. But anyway, that is there if you can't climb up the stairs, or you want to see it without visiting. But if you are visiting, the on-site journey, as it were, begins here with this lectern item in front of you, which is accompanied by some rather elegant brass panels in the ground, which show you some of the basic chronology of the site and some of the historical geography. But on this panel you can see some basic facts about the castle, how the castle, the topography of the castle fits into the topography of medieval York and modern York. And you can see that it's in braille, top left, and the outline of the plan is also tactile, so if you can't see, you can still enjoy it from standing. Then you wander up the steps, and you can see left and right there are some very helpful resting places where you can pass the pants of it on the way to the entrance. We made use of those. When you get to this vantage point, you're looking out over the Eye of York from the entrance to the Clifford Tower. And the panel will tell you that you are looking at the site of the medieval castle's courtyard, which is actually true. But that essentially is the castle bailey in front of the site of it. Then you go inside, you pass the teeny-weeny ticket office, which is a company porter's lodge, as it were. There's no shop on site, which is interesting, unique and a mad heritage site, I think. But you can buy the new guidebook there, and there it is, by the previous author, by Harold Clark. And it's very good, and it differs from the previous one in offering a revised understanding of the building. You'll find the shell keep concept is well explained in that. And obviously it reflects the recent changes to the building. There are a few quibbles, you can have a few quibbles with it, you always will, but it's a good product, and well worth taking around with you and taking away with you. Then you move on, obviously, into the interior, and there is definitely a kind of wow factor on entering sides. Photographs doesn't show it very well, but there certainly is. And you're confronted with this introductory lectern, which gives you some basic facts. It allows you to hear the commentary in foreign languages, and it suggests the best route around the building as well. And then you move on into the building, and there are a series of 4 other lecterns, and these offer themed information on 4 different periods. First of all, the early centuries up to 1200, medieval castle, 1200 to 1500. Conflict and decay, the decadence of the castle after 1500 to 1700, and then the tower since 1700. And that works quite well, as far as they go. The one thing I would say on the medieval castle one, I mean, I know this wasn't what they were intending, but it could do more on the architecture, and it could go into why the building is so extraordinary. Why on earth did the architect choose this incredibly difficult shape, and what's special about it? And there are some quite touching anachronisms and images. For example, a great white pig, that is on the 19th century. There he is in 11th century New York. So very precocious, this place. Also, the purpose of the building, I think, could be explained a little bit more. I mean, how did this tower relate and function to all the other buildings of the castle and the Bailey? Was it a self-contained royal residence when the king was there? Well, possibly. We don't know. They certainly don't try and tell you. It is claimed that it was used, the ground floor of Clifford Tower was used periodically as a mint workshop, which I found extremely, which was hardly compatible with the smells and poisonous fumes that you get from smelting precious metals in a tower which has a king living above, not very likely. But you can only get so much on a panel, obviously, and the people and stories thing does work well. And in addition to these lecterns, there are audio loops or recordings of contemporaries, in inverted commas, eyewitnesses, recalling experiences from various periods of the tower's history. For example, there's Edith of York, tells you all about the Norman conquest, actually conquered by Normans. And then there's Elias the Rabbi on the appalling massacre of the Jews in 1190. And these are good. I mean, they're well researched, they're believable, well scripted, and I'm glad to say they avoid the kind of traditional silly accents, which in some places tend to be along the lines of sort of funny background noise, clashing weapons, blowing trumpets. Oi, we said the Saxon, them Normans, big bastards. The Berkshire accent hastens around, and then some Norman chap says, Etienne, and I'm these English are pigs. So that I'm glad to say. Yeah, I enjoyed doing that bit. Anyway, it's good. The massacre bit, for example, is actually, I remember, genuinely moving, actually. They are rather hard to hear if you're a bit hard of hearing, but the alternative is that they kind of dominate the space and quite minimal. And as you're wandering around, there's another source of noise, which is a kind of background or ambient noise, broadcast in very low tones, and it's one point in the building, one point it's rain, and another one it's bird song, and some very well-researched conversations in inverted commas. Some of them are in French, some are in Latin, and they do lend. I mean, depending on your taste, they're either annoying or they lend some sort of atmosphere to your visit, as it on the whole says. And they've chosen some physical features, actual bits of the building, to make more of. I showed you the latrine itself. This is the panel in the room explaining all about it, and this is one of the features that gets its own panel. They've refrained, unlike the people at Castle Rushton in the Isle of Man, having a seated mannequin of king in action. I won't elaborate on that. I think he's left the Castle Rushton now, he was there for many years. Anyway, so you just get this very straightforward explanation of what it's for. And then you got to the roof. Another wow factor when you go up there. It really is impressive. It feels at first like you're on the deck of a ship. Not because it's got decking, I suppose, but it really is very impressive. And up there you encounter another set of lecterns, similar sort of design, explaining what you're looking at over the parapet, the view, which bits of your picture. And that works very well into the minster in the background. If you look the other way, this is the only thing which I think is a disappointment. That again is the Eye of York from a level higher than the one I showed you before. And the opportunity they're missing, I think, is they could show you with the aid of reconstruction drawings what the castle might have looked at, the rest of the castle might have looked like at various periods of history from that. Because that courtyard is extremely interesting in that those buildings themselves are very good. You've got one Baroque building in the background, two classical buildings by John Carr of York by the left. And they, in function, in the case of the courthouse, continue functions which were functions of the medieval castle. So the castle, in a sense, still lives through the person. That's interesting. But the outline, layout of the castle in Reign Henry III is pretty well understood. And to explain that through graphics, I think would have been a very useful thing. And that's because of a bugbear of mine saying. To conclude, some the structural and engineering aspects of the work, you can't really fault it. Medieval fabric is protected, and it's based on a good understanding of the fabric. The fabric was studied very carefully to it. And I think it's visually elegant. I mean, that's brought in CGI, I showed you. It's very elegant design. What it doesn't do, which was part of the original project brief, is to provide disabled access. But although the charities sort of, beat their chest a bit about that and are unhappy about it, it simply wasn't practically possible. So that's why the virtual tour and so on are important. It's going to be interesting how, as the law develops and as case law develops, what is going to happen to places like this in the future, whether it's actually going to be ulcerated to the point you can't open it at all unless everyone can see it, which I think would be nuts, because I mean, that maybe, who knows. There are a few holes in what's being offered. I mean, I've mentioned some of those. But on the whole, the offer is appealing without being dumbed down to kind of death of any historic sort. And there is a book in preparation by my former colleague Jeremy Ashby, the Heritage Office Curator, which I'm sure will come out very soon. Anyway, that's something to look forward to. And visitor numbers have gone up. They've reflected, they mirror the kind of appeal of the building which it now has, and that's really good. That's not some kind of cynical statistic. It does mean the tills ching a bit, which is good, because these buildings cost a fortune to look after. But it also means that more people are enjoying and learning about building. Better, obviously. And perhaps there are some things to borrow from this project to be used in the other house. Who knows? But certainly elsewhere. Anyway, that's it. But I do recommend go and see it again. Now, it's not the building last year or the year. Thank you.
See if there are any questions in the audience. All right.
Can you say something, Edward, about the history of the building from the Jewish massacre?
Yes. Yeah, so it's built between 1254 and 1270, and I think Henry Brains was the architect. And it remained, I mean, the thing, okay, ramble a bit, the thing about royal castles, indeed any castles, they were frightfully efficient at building. So the accounts, in particular, this account of Henry III got in the rage at the end, too slow, but it was all very well packed. The accounts were in detail and helpful at the front. What medieval castle owners, whether they were the king or other people, they were completely useless at maintenance. So there are repeated reports in the early 14th century, I think 1312 and 1313, when the place is clearly falling down, and the roof is rotten, the floors are depressed. And that happened again in the 15th century. There was another big campaign of repairs. And it's simply because they don't clean the gutters and man the roof, because the kings in London or in Scotland, and they get away with it. And there's never enough money. So there's a sort of cycle of dilapidation and repair. More interesting would be to know about what the building was used for in these various centuries. I mean, I think it almost certainly was intended as a private quarters for the king and queen, so that's and their family, and was probably used by their successors in some other way when it was in good condition. But it remained more or less entire, as far as we know, until 1684, when this explosion happened. There is a possibility, and it's hinted at, I think, by the place drawing, that actually the void in the centre was filled in, and some kind of tower was built in full 1684 at the same time. Not sure whether that's true or not. But then after that, of course, it plays a part in the Civil War, as the York does, and then it's garrisoned for the king in the 1660s and remains a military establishment until 1684, after which it's pretty useless, really. But what's happening round the tower is mostly the prison. So there have been prisons at York since the time of the conqueror. But some of the first purpose prison built post-medieval buildings, including what happened in prisons happened in York too. So the tower ends up being sort of isolated and empty and useless, and it serves really as a kind of to the garden government. And it wasn't until 1935 that the massive brick walls and this kind of terrifying radial courtyard arrangement, based on the American solitary confinement prison system, was cleared away and replaced by car park, quite intentional time. So yeah, otherwise, I mean, it's slightly in the dark. But, I'm sure Jeremy's book tells us much more.
Why two castle mods, and how do they work together?
Ah, yes. Two castles better than one, I suppose. I mean, London had two castles, one at the east end, one at the west end. These are opposite sides of the river Booth, and there may be something in that. But William was hedging his bets, I suppose. I mean, his first castle had been captured by the people of York in the north, and so was the second. So building two castles, I suppose, was kind of a security measure. Beyond that, there is no logical, tactical, or strategic explanation because the situation of the mods are not kind of a pincer movement like they are at London, kind of each end of the town as defending the town, sort of glowering over the rebellious inhabitants. What we do know is that the Bale Hill was never fortified with stone, never had stone walls around it. An excavation done in the 1960s which found wooden ramparts on the top and boat hole. So it was abandoned as a fortification fairly early, and all the effort, I mean, Henry III did he did all the castle that we know and love. So it served a purpose as a kind of castle in a time of crisis, but then was abandoned once the country settled down, and the main action was in York Castle as we know today.
How much rain gets in through the oculus at the top? Is it?
Well, everyone and I was speculating about that. I mean, you know how it rained in York. I think probably quite a lot. And we had visions of it kind of rushing out the front door or down the steps. It looked like a giant salmon leap. And I don't know, but I think probably quite a lot when it's raining hard. It doesn't look as big as it actually is in that picture. It's quite a big hole. It's like one of those holes on top of the villa called Impluvium. A bit like that. That's what it reminded me. I'm telling you our classicists. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if eventually they do that. But that would be kind of losing the point of being in contact with the weather and the air, which was part of the philosophy behind this void in ruin thing. Otherwise, I think that would be a shame. And if they do it, it would be for maintenance reasons, not kind of comfort.
Would that have caused a problem of ventilation? Or would it cause a problem of ventilation if it was occluded?
I think it probably would. It would heat up in summer, so it would probably. There might even be a microclimate, so it might start raining inside. It happens at the Crystal Palace.
Have birds ever nested in there? For example, at Manchester University, they once had a goshawk. Kept the pigeons away, but
there have been birds of all sorts, including rooks, including jackals, nesting in holes outside. I think on the whole, pigeons and other birds are discouraged. Pigeons in particular, pigeon dung is extremely acidic and eats its way through limestones like nobody's business. So on the outside of the building there are holes in the wall for where the scaffolding where they were built. They've all been very carefully blocked up. But I think one of their objectives was not a sort of nature campaign, very much to do with building. But I may be wrong.
Well, very nice to meet you. Thank you very much for very authoritative, also very entertaining talk. So
Good, thank you very much
indeed. Yeah.